Welcome back to the All About Everest podcast. I'm your host, Pauline Reynolds Nuttall, and today's episode takes us into the most dangerous place on Earth, the death zone. It's a phrase that captures the imagination and the fear of climbers everywhere. The death zone begins above 8,000 meters, or 26,247 feet, where oxygen levels drop so low that the human body simply can't survive for long. Every minute spent there is a battle, not just against the mountain, but against your own biology. In this episode, we'll explore what actually happens to the human body in the death zone, how climbers and Sherpas adapt, why oxygen is both a lifeline and a controversy, and what lessons we've learned from history's most haunting moments on Everest. But first, I want to start with some Everest updates and a quick housekeeping thing, because this week's headlines had me almost absolutely stunned. This morning, I was scrolling through the news and saw several articles claiming that 1,000 climbers were stuck on Mount Everest. At first, I thought, wait, what? 1,000 people on Everest in October? That doesn't even sound possible. The fall season is usually quiet compared to the spring rush, but after reading deeper, it turns out the headlines were a bit misleading and honestly a bit sensationalized. Those people aren't climbers on Everest itself. They're trekkers on the Tibetan side near Everest who got stranded in a freak blizzard. It's still a serious situation, but it's not the chaos on the upper mountain that the headlines make it sound like. Reports say there's been one confirmed death and that dozens of groups were caught when the storm hit unexpectedly. What's unusual is the timing. The fall climbing season is typically known for stable, calm weather, especially compared to the unpredictable storms of spring. So this blizzard was a surprise, a reminder that the Himalayas have a way of humbling everyone, even in so-called good conditions. There's also something interesting happening quietly on the northern Tibetan side of Everest right now. Word is spreading about a new ski descent attempt, possibly tied to a documentary project. Some climbers are speculating that it's connected to last year's mysterious expedition, the one that was canceled because of multiple issues. And last year, they thought that they possibly had found Andrew Sandy Irvine's foot high in the mountains. Nothing's been confirmed, but this fall's team might have dual goals, a ski descent and a search for more evidence of that 1924 climb. Everything's under wraps, likely because of tight filming restrictions and also permits in Tibet. So while most people think of fall as the off-season, Everest still finds ways to surprise us. From stranded trekkers to secret climbs, the mountain continues to remind us that it never truly sleeps. And for my quick housekeeping update, I promised you guys that I would be working on providing better quality audio. I know it's a huge thing, and so I have found someone to edit episodes. This will be the first episode that they're editing, and I'm hoping that it's a good one. So if you listen to this episode and you think that the quality has improved, definitely let me know. Editing definitely costs money, and I want to keep this podcast ad-free at least for a while longer. So in order to support the editing of this podcast and the time that I spend, you're always welcome to buy me a coffee. It's a way that you can support the podcast and me. I'll put a link in the show notes. Now let's step into the death zone, where every breath is a struggle. The death zone begins above 8,000 meters, where oxygen levels drop to about 1/3 of what they are at sea level. At that altitude, each breath delivers only a fraction of the oxygen your brain and muscles need. Climbers often describe it as trying to run a marathon while breathing through a straw. Even simple movements like clipping into a rope or zipping up a jacket feel monumental. Without enough oxygen, the body starts shutting down. Muscles deteriorate, organs strain, and blood thickens. The brain becomes foggy, leading to confusion, poor judgment, and sometimes hallucinations. Prolonged exposure leads to high-altitude cerebral edema, where the brain swells inside the skull, or high-altitude pulmonary edema, where lungs fill with fluid. And you can even get both of those at 14,000 feet. At that point, descent is the only cure. But in the death zone, every downward step can be just as deadly as going up. Oxygen is the great equalizer on Everest and also one of the most debated topics in mountaineering. When Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay first summited Everest in 1953, they used bottled oxygen. Back then, it was heavy and unreliable, but it worked. Without it, their climb likely would have failed. Then in 1978, Reinhold Messner and Peter Habler changed everything by reaching the summit without supplemental oxygen. Messner later said, "Without oxygen, I felt like a single giant lung, breathing, breathing, breathing. It was one of the most remarkable achievements in climbing history." Today's systems are lighter and far more efficient, but the debate continues. Some climbers insist that using oxygen to make Everest too easy. That's far from the truth. Even with oxygen, the death zone is lethal. Bottled oxygen simply buys time. It slows the dying process. It doesn't stop it. And for Sherpas, who often spend hours fixing ropes and carrying heavy loads above 8,000 meters, even oxygen can't offset the sheer physical toll. They've just adapted to survive better than most of us ever could. The higher you go, the more your body rebels. At 26,000 feet, your heart rate skyrockets as it fights to move oxygen-starved blood. The digestive system shuts down, making it nearly impossible to eat. Many climbers lose 15 to 25 pounds during an expedition. Dehydration is constant. It takes hours to melt snow for water, and drinking too little can thicken the blood, raising the risk of stroke or frostbite. Mentally, things get even worse. Judgment falters, coordination fades. Some climbers begin to hallucinate or forget where they are. It's common for climbers to remove their gloves or oxygen masks in confusion, something rescuers call paradoxical undressing. And then there's summit fever, that irresistible pull to keep going even when logic says to turn back. It's a mix of adrenaline, exhaustion, and obsession. Countless tragedies have happened because of it. In the death zone, ambition can be as dangerous as the weather. The death zone has been the stage for some of Everest's most haunting moments. The 1996 Everest disaster remains one of the most infamous. A storm swept in as multiple teams descended from the summit, trapping climbers above 8,000 meters. Oxygen ran out, temperatures plummeted, and 8 climbers died. The story was later told in John Krakauer's Into Thin Air and inspired multiple films. We did cover all of the books from the 1996 Everest disaster in a previous episode. Then there's the Rainbow Valley, just below the summit, named for the colorful down suits of the climbers who never made it down. It's a chilling sight, but it's also a reminder of just how thin the line between success and tragedy can be. In 2019, the photo of climbers lined up like a traffic jam on the ridge went viral. Overcrowding and delays in the death zone led to several deaths that season. Many suffocated or collapsed from exhaustion while waiting their turn at the summit. Each of these events teaches the same lesson. Everest doesn't forget mistakes, no matter how small. Climbers spend weeks or even months preparing their bodies for high altitude. At base camp, they begin slow rotations up and down the mountain, climbing to higher camps, sleeping there, and descending again to recover. This process triggers the body to produce more red blood cells, improving oxygen transport. But it's never perfect. Even the strongest athletes struggle to adapt above 8,000 meters. Some use altitude tents or train at high altitude resorts before expeditions. Others rely on medication like Diamox, which helps prevent altitude sickness. But nothing replaces experience, and no amount of training can prepare you for how the death zone really feels. Sherpas, on the other hand, are built for it. Generations of life in the Khumbu region have led to genetic adaptations, larger lungs, slower metabolisms, and an incredible efficiency in using oxygen. That's why they can lead rope fixing teams, haul heavy loads, and still move with quiet strength where others collapse. Despite the dangers, some survival stories from the death zone are nothing short of miraculous. In 1996, Beck Weathers, a Texas pathologist, was left for dead twice after being blinded by the altitude and buried in a blizzard. The next morning, to everyone's shock, he walked into camp with frozen hands and face. He later lost both hands and part of his nose, but lived to tell his story, one that continues to inspire climbers around the world. And I highly recommend his book. It is very good. Then there's Lincoln Hall, an Australian climber declared dead after a night alone at 28,000 feet in 2006. When another team passed by the next morning, they found him sitting upright, talking about how beautiful the view was. He survived, descended, and lived to write a book about the experience called Dead Lucky. That's the same year that David Sharp died on Mount Everest. These stories are rare exceptions. Most who collapse in the death zone never get up again, but every survival reminds us of the human spirit's stubborn will to live. Climbing technology has evolved dramatically. Today, GPS trackers allow teams to monitor climbers in real time. Weather forecasting has become incredibly accurate, helping climbers target short summit windows. New clothing technology, down suits, gloves, and oxygen systems have also made climbs safer. The Nepal government has even begun requiring reflective tracking devices, I forget the actual name of them, for climbers to help locate those who go missing in storms or whiteouts. And we're still not sure on how effective these little, I don't even know what to call them, aluminum tabs. Even with these advancements, Everest is still unpredictable. It's one of the last places on Earth where human control ends and nature takes over. The mountain doesn't care about experience, fame, or fitness. It simply tests who can endure. The death zone is more than a name. It's a line that separates human ambition from human limits. Above 8,000 meters, there's no safety net, no comfort, and no forgiveness. Every climber who enters it knows the risks. They go anyway for reasons as personal as the mountain is vast. For some, it's about achievement. For others, it's about understanding what they're capable of when everything else is stripped away. There's people who climb to support a cause. Everybody's different. In the end, the death zone is not about death. It's about life and how far we're willing to go to feel alive. One of the things about the death zone is that the majority of deaths occur in the death zone and on the way down. I can't remember the actual statistics. I know they're out there. I bet Alan Arnett knows these because he's a statistics guy. But the death zone really does claim the majority of people. And not only is it considered one of the most dangerous parts of the mountain, because of course we have the Khumbu Icefall, which is extremely dangerous, but to me it's probably the make it or break it moment of any climb, because we hear so many people who almost made it to the top and they made it to the 8,000 meter line and they've had to turn around. And luckily for a lot of them, they decided to turn around because, again, when your brain is starved of oxygen, when you're sleep deprived, because when you're at those high altitudes, it doesn't just affect your eating and your drinking and your mind, it also affects your sleep. Sometimes you do make poor decisions. And a lot of those decisions we saw during the 1996 Everest disasters and some of the disasters since then. Even though now, almost 30 years later, because of all of the improvements of tech and how people guide and safety measures, a lot was learned from the 1996 Everest disaster. And it's become more of, if you die, it's because something truly went wrong, even though you had all of the right tools. Maybe you picked the wrong guiding company. Maybe you weren't ready for it because you had very little experience. It's one of those things that we can debate about for hours. All right, even though it's the off season from Everest, people are still climbing. They're climbing other areas of the Himalayas like Manaslu. Shipapangma is closed to climbing right now. But again, there's other mountains where there are people who are climbing. So just because it might be our off season, because we focus on Everest, it doesn't mean that there's an off season for the mountaineers. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate, review, and follow the All About Everest podcast. Your support helps other listeners to find the show and keep this adventure going. I need to get my ratings back up because I let them slide because I neglected the podcast for the last year. And again, if you want to support the podcast, buy me a coffee. I put the link in the show notes. It will help me edit ongoing episodes, but also go back to edit ones from the very beginning. That's my project for 2026. You can also join our free Everest school group where we share updates, news, behind the scenes notes, and maybe even start a book club. Find me online at Mama Bear Outdoors or at the All About Everest podcast on social media. Until next time, climb your own climb and stay safe out there.